The moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. People ask, why do so many of these comic companies have an entertainment play? Why is their whole business model seem to be predicated on, we're making IP, but not for comics, not for readers, not for those people. We're making IP that can be turned into movies. Well, there's a simple reason for that. And of course, there's lots of companies that are doing it. Aftershock was doing it. Vault was doing it. IDW is still doing it. You have a bunch of companies that are all kind of with this various, this business plan. And it's not entirely crazy, but here's what it's predicated in. There's kind of a couple things. And by the way, one big aspect of all this to just keep in mind is the copycat phenomenon, meaning in comics, like a lot of businesses, but you really see it in comics. When one person does something that's more or less successful, everyone else copies it. They follow suit. Like, this is the new template, and so we're going to all do it. And this has been depending on your point of view, aspect or problem of comics for quite a long time, is this entire, just everybody does the same thing. And of course, if you've seen a lot of this stuff work, if everybody does the same thing, or what was the quote in The Incredibles? When everyone is super, no one is. It's like that. Some of these business plans are not bad ideas, but you just cannot regurgitate and copy and clone them forever. So here's kind of what it's based in. Basically, for a lot of comic companies, it's expensive. You've got to hire a staff. If you're going to do licensing, you got to cough up the money to pay for that license. You got to print stuff. You got to deliver it to stores. And it's what any kind of publishing business is often called a cost-intensive business. Now, granted, it's not as cost-intensive if you're, making a hospital, or if you're going to be a pharmaceutical company and you have to go through FDA trials. It'll take a year and a half, 2 years to be developed. But it's far more kind of cost-intensive than, say, a tiny startup, which, 3 or 4 people can do in a college dorm room, create some software that's interesting. There's lots of stories behind that, including some of the biggest companies in the world now. But, you can basically, if you're an engineer and you know how to code, and you have access to a basic level of equipment, you can do quite a bit of damage. And that's why you see a lot of what they call software as a service, or SaaS companies, that start up with fairly basic things. This piece of software will allow you to encrypt files, or this piece of software gives you a photo editing service that will plug into Instagram, or all these kind of little micro companies that have, various things that they do. They're cheap to do. If you're going to be a comic publisher, it's going to cost you money. Now, a lot of you may say, well, wait a minute, why are all these people able to do the crowdfunding stuff themselves? Well, sure. If you're doing one book and you're going to release like one book a year, and it's an art team, then sure, you can do that cheap. But if you're going to actually put a book out and put it into stores, you're going to try and put comics out every single month, the costs rack up. Again, not extraordinarily high, but high. And so that money's got to come from somewhere. How do you start your business? One of the things about comics as well is, if you're going to start a comic book company, then you're going to need to produce some comics. You're going to need to do them all on hope that you'll find an audience. You then got to do a certain level of marketing, and then you got to get into Diamond. You got to put stuff out there, and you got to market again. Then you go to comic shops. It takes a long time to get a return on investment for that stuff to actually be profitable if you're doing a month in, month out comic business. Now, by the way, it bears saying it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. You can start relatively slow. You can control your costs. And, when people talk about marketing, they're often thinking about a very old school view of marketing. They're not thinking about, more modern marketing. And on top of that, it's my impression anyway, that a lot of comic publishers are really built, and they view their target audience, or the people they really have to reach, as, friends of theirs on Twitter, as opposed to the mass market. That's why you see a lot of companies come out and, almost from day one, you look at their business model, you look at what they call the value proposition, what they're going to market with, and you go, who's going to buy this? And then you realize, well, this was aimed at Twitter people. This is not aimed at kind of the mass market. So there again, you have a problem. If you're aiming something at Twitter people, it's going to cause you to spend, money that you may not ordinarily spend or try to reach that audience. The other problem is of the people, if you're selling your comics into a comic shop, it ignores the fact that, maybe 5% of the people going into that shop are actually active on Twitter. This, by the way, is a completely separate topic, completely separate video, but if you look around and you see the people who are going to Comic Cons and the people who are on social media, and if it's like a little Venn diagram against people who actually go into comic shops and put money on the table and buy things, there's not a lot of overlap. It's like maybe 15% overlap. Yeah, a lot of people who go in and buy comics in a comic shop also go to cons, but a lot of people at those cons are also there to see actors and anime voice people, and they're not there for comics in a lot of cases. It also tends to be the more extreme audience that are going to push you to the fringes of your comic audience. So anyway, it's not a good audience to pull from. But anyway, I digress. If you're trying to build a comic publisher, you're going to need some cash. And a lot of people who are starting these things up don't have cash, or if they're smart business people, they certainly don't want to use their own cash. So they need to go get cash from somewhere, which means you're going to go raise money. You're going to go find somebody who will give you money. Now, if you go in and you tell them, hey, I'm starting a publishing business, comics, and my market, the place where I'm going to sell these books is a direct market, which is a fairly limited amount of stores. And, it's going to take a couple of years before I see any kind of return on investment. My product overall is sold at, $3.99 a pop. So the box price, in this case, the comic price, is pretty low. So I'm going to have to sell a high volume of that. And any investor is going to ask you for metrics to say, well, what's this market like? How much does it sell in a year? And you go, well, the comic business is doing great. But somebody's going to hand you a couple $1 million is most likely going to ask for a little bit more diligence than that. So they're going to ask for your forecast. Unless you're a balls out liar, and most people who are starting companies, they learn not to lie about this stuff. You don't lie to your investors, or you shouldn't. That's how you wind up in jail. But anyway, you're going to go and you're going to say, yeah, we're hoping for a print run of like 5,000, 6,000 copies. And it's very easy to do the math. Okay, 6,000 copies times $3.99, you're taking a 40% cut. Hey, that's not a lot of money, says a person who you're trying to get, $10 million from in order to start your business. So they want a better story. It needs to be a better story than just, I'm going to go sell comics, because if that's your whole story, nobody's going to give you money. Just point blank, nobody's going to want to give you $10 million for that. They're going to say, well, this isn't a good return on my investment. I could go, just put my money into a CD in the bank and have a higher percentage return than investing in comics. So what else are you doing? And that's where these companies say, aha, but we are doing more. The big money is in selling to Netflix. And listen to this value proposition, because it's very, very attractive in the way it sounds. There's nothing wrong with it. Well, it has a huge flaw, but it sounds good. It goes basically something like this. Hey, it costs a lot of money to make movies and TV. It's millions of dollars to shoot an episode. Wouldn't it be nice if you could very, very cheaply put out a comic that may cost you, I don't know, $40,000 to make? But it would basically put these characters out into the world. You'd get some market research. You get an assessment on how these characters are doing, what's going to work, what isn't. And if the story is a breakaway hit, hey, you've put $40,000 at risk to get a hit story. Now you sink the money into that $2 million pilot, and you're most likely going to do great, because you basically made your investment safer. Otherwise, we're going to write a bunch of scripts. We're going to go out and film movies, and maybe it'll take off, maybe it won't. Who knows? But this is basically a $40,000 insurance policy to see if something will work. And if you're an investor, that sounds pretty good. Because, and this may get a little dense and complicated, if you're just making a publishing company, why would you do that? Well, there's 3 reasons why you would start any kind of company. But we'll stick with comic company. Why you're going to start a comic company? Okay, there's only 3 reasons why you would do that. Number 1, you just love comics. And fundamentally, you don't care if you make money or lose money. You just want to put out the best possible stories you can. Well, that option is called the noble option, and it applies to absolutely nobody who's in comics right now. I'm joking a little bit. There's definitely people who are passionate about comics, but the reality is, even if you super, super duper love comics, spending $5 million of your own cash in order to, just play in this space, we've seen some of those. I think CrossGen was kind of that way. But they tend to, any smart person who's got $5 million to spare also would go, why am I going to put my own money into this? I love comics, but I don't want to be broke. I'm not going to be, I can enjoy my passion without losing my shirt. And the reality is, if you're that person going to an investor and saying, please give me $10 million, why? Because I love comics. That nobody's going to give you money for that. So then you got option number 2. Why would you open a comic publisher? Why would you start one? Well, because you believe you're going to be so successful, you're going to put so many great comics out, and you're going to have nothing but hits, that you'll be able to go public, or at the very least, live a very fat and happy life, just with millions of dollars raking in. You're just so confident you'll put out great books that your company will be profitable enough to sustain itself and give you a handsome return. Or there's option number 3. And option number 3 is, I need to make just enough money so that someone else will find the comic publisher very valuable, and they'll give me $20 million to buy my company. And then I put the $20 million in my pocket, I go off and start another company, and then whatever happens, happens. Like hopefully they make a lot of money out of the comic, but who knows? Not my problem, because I sold it, I took my cash. Now, the reality is the majority of comic publishers are that third one. Even if you start as a second one, meaning I have good intentions, I'm going to make lots of money, so I'm going to put out hit books, most likely after a couple of years of that, maybe even not a couple of years, you quickly get to, who can I pawn this thing off to? And that's a lot of startups. And if you're trying to do that, that's basically an investment or acquisition play that you're doing. If that's your plan, then what you need to do is make the upside of the company look as successful as humanly possible. Which means in publishing business, somebody would buy that, they would buy it valued at cost. They basically value it at 1x return. So if you're making $20 million, they might give you $20 million for it. They just would say, you don't have to fight for this $20 million. You just get to, put this $20 million in your pocket, and then we'll take over from here. That's very attractive to people. But what's more attractive, if you're trying to, create a company for an acquisition, is you want to have a 2 or a 3x multiplier. And that's where they certainly value your profit, but they also value your upside. The reality is, if you're just a comic company, the only upside you have is to try and convince people you have genius ideas in your head that are going to be massive breakaway comic hits. But even that is capped. However, a much better upside is to say, hey, these comics that are hits for our company, those are going to get turned into billion-dollar movies with a huge return. And that's the upside, and that's why all the comic companies do it. That's why they're pursuing this. I would just wager this. I've talked to a couple, publishers and people in high-level positions there, and, very few actually believe this is true. They don't believe that they're going to be a billion-dollar IP farm. They're still selling their comic company that way because that's the game. If you want to get investment, if you want to get cash, if you want somebody to basically give you money to keep going, you're going to have to give them the bigger story, whether you believe it or not. And I would argue for like an IDW, which is why, it feels like they're going to be in trouble soon. Or an Aftershock, or like we saw it happen to them, or Vault, or, Boom, or these other companies. I think they're, the trouble comes into eventually investors get tired and they're going to want to see some kind of return. And none of these companies have really done an effective job of being able to tell its story. Arguably, the guy who told that story really well is Mark Miller, and he got the Netflix buyout. And I think that, I don't know if there's more of those. Look, I mean, like James Tynion, Scott Snyder, some of these guys running around. You don't think that they would? You don't think they don't want the Mark Miller deal? Of course they do. Scott Snyder would love that Mark Miller deal, but I don't think I don't really think there's many of those deals on the table anymore. That bubble is kind of burst. So anyway, that's why they do it. They do it because and it will be great movies, and this IP can generate films. It's called upside. That's the name of that game. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hey, thanks for listening.